this session, we will discuss what is SQL, discuss databases versus data warehouses, and how SQL Server is used. The learning objectives for this video are for you to be able to discuss SQL Server and how it functions, explain the purpose of a database and the purpose of a data warehouse, and be able to explain the authentication modes we have in SQL Server. Now, what is SQL Server? Well, SQL stands for Server Query Language, and SQL Server is what is called an RDBMS, or Relational Database Management System, similar to Oracle, DB2, or Sybase. Those are other RDBMSs. These are systems in place meant to show, relate, and kind of catalog data to be used. SQL Server's primary purpose is that it is used to manage, organize, or store data from various sources, whether it's RDBMS or DBMS. Examples of database management systems would be things like text files, flat files, system files, CSV files, and Excel files. What makes these different from an RDBMS is that in a DBMS, you are well off in storing data, but that's about the only purpose it serves. In SQL Server, Oracle, DB2, or Sybase, let's say you open one of those up. You can see the different tables, you can see the different amounts of data, but you can also see how they might relate or reflect on one another. Versus in a DBMS, let's say like an Excel file, you might just open it up and you just see data. There's no other information to go through. If we have a flat file, you can open that up and again, it will store data, but that's about it. There's nothing else we can really do with it. Now, common versions out for SQL Server are 2005. Even though it is getting old, there are a few companies that do use SQL Server 2005 from time to time. 2008 R2, which is one of the main standards of using SQL Server. 2012, which is slowly beginning to replace 2008 R2. And the newest version at this date is 2014. This one is still out mainly for private use. It hasn't been implemented too highly in most companies, but it definitely will come around in time. Well, now that we know a little bit about what SQL Server is, let's talk a little bit about databasing versus data warehouses. Oftentimes there's a misconception that a database and a data warehouse are the same thing, but a data warehouse is just a lot bigger. This isn't very accurate as it is in realistic life. When we talk about databases and data warehouses, not only are they two different systems, but there's two different purposes behind them. Now, throughout the training, your main focus will be on databases, but towards the end, we'll go over a little bit what are data warehouses and their purpose. But for now, we can understand the general differences between the two. A database is a current system that's in place to manage real-time transactions. These would be things perhaps like a security system, a POS system, what stands for point of sale, and other systems in place that we would enable to have real time, like in a store, in a machine shop, or something like that. That's why these databases get the name of OLTP, which stands for Online Transaction Processing. These are systems that are online, monitor transactions or quick units of work, and they do processing. So a good example for these would be store systems. Let's say you go to a Target, you go to a Walmart, you go to even a 7-Eleven. There's going to be a computer system in place that must hold the employee logins, the timings, product inventory, as well as prices. This is what enables you to go through a checkout lane, and all they simply do is scan the UPC barcode at the back of your item and bring up a price. That is a database in place monitoring and keeping track of all that data. A data warehouse, on the other hand, serves a different purpose. This is a system that's used to store and hold large amounts of data for analytical or management purposes. So they store all this information and all this data, and they have it in place over time so they can monitor things like perhaps sales and different figures, maybe different trends and things like that. For this reason, it gets the label of OLAP, or Online Analytical Processing. Here, you can see that the name has changed. So when we say online analytical, which means we're dealing now with statistics, with numerical data in large quantities for analysis reasons. An example of this might be a central system showing various trends in sales, such as different times as certain products might sell more, which demographic might buy certain products more than others, or just how various locations can affect your overall business. Examples you might see that are perhaps things like snack sales will go up when school is just beginning, especially for middle schools and elementary schools. So things like smaller foods would definitely go higher in sales. When it comes close to the winter seasons, more things like turkey and ham sales will increase. This is something that is measured and used in a data warehouse. Now that we've kind of talked about SQL Server a little bit, we know about databases and data warehouse, we're going to talk about authentication modes for SQL Server. And we'll see that later in another video when we first begin SQL Server and start it up. Now, when you guys installed SQL Server, during the installation process, you should have come to a screen that asked you about authentication modes. And there were two choices you had. You either had Windows credentials or mixed mode. Now, what is authentication mode? Authentication mode is what allows you access to SQL Server. When you guys installed SQL Server onto your machine, you have now created a virtual server on your computer. And this server needs to have access to various credentials. When you installed it, everyone should have chosen Windows credentials. Windows credentials makes things a little easy, so all it means is that the user account or the Windows user account that installed SQL Server has access to the server as long as that account is signed in. So let's say we have two accounts on your machine. One account installs SQL Server. Now whenever that account logs in and begins SQL Server, all you have to do is type in local and click connect and you'll go into SQL Server. If another account tries to log in and do the same thing, their credentials will match, so they will be denied access. Now, the second mode we have is SQL Server or mixed mode. And this is when you now need a username or password to actually get into SQL Server. This is something that will be more common in the business world because when you are working on SQL Server, there's going to be more security involved than if you just have it on your machine like so. Right now it's training, so we don't have too much of a concern. But when you're in a business environment, there might be computers that are only allowed at the company. They're not allowed to be taken out and different things like that. Or you might have a company laptop that you can take out, in which case authentication mode is going to need a little bit more security than simply being able to log in. So these are the two authentication modes we have for SQL Server. Now, if you begin your SQL Server, what should happen is a screen should pop up. Go ahead and begin SQL Server now. In this case, we are running SQL Server 2012, and you'll see that it says connect to SQL Server, and it's asking for the authentication. So you can give either SQL Server authentication if you have that, or your Windows authentication. In this case, I have Windows authentication. All I have to do is click connect, and it will connect to my SQL Server instance, and I am brought now into this empty plane here. Please take down any questions you might have, and they'll be answered in the Q&A portion of the training. Now, to summarize for this video, you should now be familiar with the general use and purpose of SQL Server and other RDBMSs like it, whether it's for a database or for a data warehouse. Now, you should also be able to tell the differences between a database and data warehouse and explain what is OLTP and what is OLAP. Lastly, you should now be able to explain the two authentication modes we have for SQL Server. Thank you, and this has been Module 2, Introduction to SQL Server.